James grew up in Silverwood, a picturesque village surrounded by snow-capped mountains. During the holidays, the village looked like a fairy tale, with lights hanging from every roof and the sound of bells echoing everywhere. But for James, all this joy seemed far away. Before I go any further, if you feel that stories like this touch your soul, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It's your support that allows us to keep sharing messages of love, awakening, and transformation. For as long as he could remember, James felt as if his soul belonged somewhere else, to something much bigger than that small village. It wasn't ingratitude, but an inexplicable feeling that he was just a visitor in that world. As a child, he would look up at the starry sky and feel a heaviness in his heart, as if something or someone was waiting for him somewhere far away. His parents, concerned about his melancholy, enrolled him in festivities and social groups. But although he took part, he felt out of place. At school, when teachers asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up, James couldn't answer like the others. While his classmates said things like doctor or footballer, he felt that none of these roles made sense to him. He knew there was something else, but he couldn't verbalize what it was. When he walked through the woods around Silverwood, James felt something different. The trees seemed to welcome him, the wind seemed to whisper secrets, and he felt momentarily at peace. There, away from people and expectations, he could be himself. But when he returned to the village, the feeling of displacement returned in full force. James learned early on that the world wasn't always kind to those who didn't go with the flow. At school, he was often the target of jokes and mockery. "Why are you so strange?" his classmates would ask, laughing. He didn't like competitive games and preferred to read books or ask philosophical questions. Once, during a history lesson, he asked his teacher why human beings repeated the same mistakes over the centuries. "Why do we fight for power when we're all going to die one day?" he asked. The whole room erupted in laughter, and even the teacher, surprised, smiled uncomfortably before changing the subject. These episodes hurt him deeply, but he rarely responded. He didn't want to create conflict. He just wanted to be understood. Over time, James began to shut down. He talked less about his ideas and hid his true personality, fearful of being ridiculed again. Even at home, things weren't much different. His family, although loving, didn't understand why he seemed so different from his brothers. While they loved ordinary activities such as watching sports or playing cards, James preferred to spend his time alone, reflecting on life or exploring nature. Worse still, some people seemed to take advantage of his kindness. James had a generous heart and always offered help when he could. But he was often left behind or forgotten after people got what they wanted. He began to wonder if it was worth being kind in a world that seemed so indifferent. As James grew up, he realized that he never fit in anywhere. At school, he was a spectator, watching others form friendships that seemed natural and lasting, while he struggled to connect. When he moved into new circles, history repeated itself. At work, things were no different. James tried several jobs, but none seemed right. In one of them, he questioned the motive behind an unnecessary and inefficient practice. Instead of being praised for his observation, he was labeled problematic. He couldn't accept what everyone else seemed to accept without question. Rules that made sense to others made him uneasy. James felt trapped in a cycle where he had to conform in order to survive. But he knew he couldn't betray his essence. At parties or family gatherings, he also felt like a fish out of water. Trivial conversations about the weather or sports bored him. He longed for deeper discussions, but every time he tried to introduce a new subject, people deflected or ignored him. James began to wonder if there was something wrong with him. "Why is it so hard to connect with others?" he thought. He knew he was different, but he still didn't understand that his difference was a blessing, not a curse. Although he didn't fit in easily, James had something that many admired: a natural leadership. He didn't seek to be a leader, but people naturally gravitated towards him when they needed guidance. At school, his classmates came to him secretly for help with assignments or advice, even if they mocked him in public. At work, his colleagues often turned to him to solve problems or mediate conflicts. James was intuitive, fair, and impartial. He had no interest in power or control. His only desire was to help people find solutions. This innate leadership, however, often put him in difficult situations. While many admired him, others were envious of his ability to lead effortlessly. Once on a work project, he led his team to achieve impressive results. But instead of receiving recognition, a superior took all the credit. Despite the injustice, James didn't complain. He knew that his value didn't depend on recognition from others. James couldn't accept anything without question. From an early age, he asked why in almost every situation. When his parents took him to church for the first time, he asked, "Why would God allow so much suffering in the world if he is so powerful?" These uncomfortable questions often brought him into conflict with authority figures. At school, he asked teachers why certain historical facts were taught while others were omitted. At work, he questioned hierarchies and unfair practices. This habit of questioning made people see him as problematic or stubborn. But for James, it wasn't about creating conflict. He wanted to understand the world deeply, and when he saw injustices, he felt he needed to challenge them. His questioning led him to explore different philosophies, religions, and sciences. He wanted to discover the truth behind things, even if this alienated him even more from the people around him. James began to realize that his mere presence often bothered people. He didn't need to say anything. Just being there seemed to trigger negative reactions in some people. He noticed that insecure individuals, or those with questionable intentions, became defensive or hostile around him. Once, during a meeting, he calmly asked about the transparency of a process, and one of his colleagues exploded in anger. James was confused. He hadn't said anything offensive, but it still seemed to have hit a nerve. Over time, he realized that his energy and authenticity often exposed the insecurities or falsehoods of the people around him. He didn't do it intentionally, but his light revealed the shadows that others tried to hide. This made living with him difficult for some people, but it also made others attracted to his sincerity and depth. James began to realize that, in order to avoid conflict, he often hid parts of himself. When he was in a group of new people, he chose to speak less, avoid his deepest thoughts, and even hide his opinions. He did this because he had already learned that when he showed himself completely, he annoyed others. He remembered an occasion when, during a casual conversation about the future, he suggested that society should value empathy more than profit. One of the participants laughed at him and said, "You live in a fantasy world. That's never going to happen." From that moment on, James began to self-censor, protecting his light. But it frustrated him deeply. He felt like he was betraying himself by hiding who he was to please others. Each time he dimmed his light, the feeling of loneliness and disconnection increased, creating a cycle that left him emotionally exhausted. From a young age, James was fascinated by issues related to justice. He felt an almost obsessive need to expose what was wrong in the world. While other children dreamed of conventional careers, he fantasized about being someone who would change the system. An investigative journalist, a defender of nature, or a human rights activist. Once, while walking through the forest, he came across a group of people cutting down trees illegally. Instead of ignoring the situation, he recorded what he saw and reported it to the local authorities. Despite his action, some people in the village began to criticize him, saying that he was meddling where he shouldn't. But James couldn't help himself. He felt it was his responsibility to fight against the evil he saw around him. This impulse to expose the truth was as natural to him as breathing. Loneliness was a constant in James's life. He couldn't connect deeply with the people around him, and even when he tried, something seemed to be missing. He felt that no one understood his doubts, his pain, or his way of seeing the world. In his darkest moments, James would ask himself, "Why am I so different? Why doesn't anyone understand me?" He remembered Christmas parties when he would sit in silence while everyone around him laughed and talked. It wasn't that he didn't like people, but he just didn't know how to participate in that superficiality. James began to accept that, for him, loneliness was inevitable. But at the same time, he felt that this loneliness was necessary for him to discover who he really was. While others worried about everyday problems, James spent hours pondering bigger questions. He wondered about the meaning of life, the existence of God, the purpose of suffering, and the destiny of humanity. As a child, these questions made him seem strange. "Why do you care about that?" people would ask. But James couldn't help himself. His mind was constantly searching for answers to questions that most people wouldn't even consider. These reflections led him to study philosophy, spirituality, and even science. He read books that challenged his worldview, and with each new learning experience, he felt he was getting closer to something greater, a universal truth that he couldn't explain, but knew existed. Despite his loneliness, James attracted many people into his life. Interestingly, they were often people who were broken in some way, emotionally, spiritually, or even physically. He seemed to be a beacon for those who needed healing. These people came to him seeking advice, comfort, or simply his presence. They said they felt better when they were with him, even if he did nothing but listen. Although this brought meaning to James's life, it was also exhausting. He felt responsible for alleviating the suffering of others, but at the same time he realized that few people offered the same care in return. James's life always seemed more challenging than others. While the people around him found relatively simple paths, he faced barriers at every turn. From minor inconveniences to major losses, he felt that the universe was constantly testing him. He remembered a specific episode when he tried to start a small business to help the community. Despite his dedication, everything went wrong. Partners dropped out, clients disappeared, and he was forced to close down. However, James began to realize that these challenges were not punishments, but lessons. Each obstacle he overcame made him stronger and wiser, preparing him for something greater. Even in the most difficult moments, James felt an unshakable certainty that he was destined for something great. It was a feeling he had carried with him since he was a child, a flame inside him that never went out, even when everything seemed to be falling apart. He knew deep down that he had the potential to impact the world in a significant way. This certainty motivated him to keep going, even when he couldn't see the path ahead. James always had a special connection with animals. They seemed to sense his energy in a way that humans could not. During his walks in the forest, birds would land near him, and even wild animals seemed comfortable in his presence. Once he found a lost and hungry dog on the side of the road. As he approached, the animal, which should have been frightened, looked at him with confidence. James took him home, and the dog became his most faithful companion. This connection with animals brought him joy and peace, but also reinforced the feeling that he was different. He knew that this harmony with the animal kingdom was a reflection of his high vibration. Dear chosen one, James's story is, in a way, the story of all of us who carry the feeling of being different, out of place, but deeply connected to something bigger. Perhaps you too have felt the weight of not being understood, of walking a lonely path while trying to understand your place in the world. But know this: your difference is not a mistake, it's a gift. It is your soul's call to an extraordinary journey, to bring light, hope, and transformation in times of darkness. Even when the challenges seem overwhelming, remember that you carry within you a strength that the world does not yet fully know. You are not alone. There are others like you, scattered around the world, awakening, feeling the same call and facing the same struggles. We are a community of connected souls, and together, our light is stronger. If you've made it this far, I invite you to reflect and share in the comments. Which of these signs have you noticed in your life? What has your journey as a chosen one been like? Your story is important. By sharing it, you can inspire and strengthen others who are going through similar experiences. Also, I want to invite you to go even deeper into your connection with the divine through the Chosen Devotional. This is a 40-day purpose that will help you find clarity, strength, and inspiration for your spiritual journey. Each day offers an opportunity to connect with your purpose, explore your faith, and hear the voice of your soul more clearly. I am George, your friend and spiritual leader, and I am here to help you on your journey of awakening and self-discovery. If this message resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Your presence in this community is precious, and together, we can build a space of love, unity, and enlightenment. You are loved. You are needed. Your light makes all the difference. May the next 40 days bring you renewal, hope, and the certainty that you are exactly where you should be. With love and gratitude, George.